Dawn Shadow, an audio story script. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, a low moan that carried the chill of dawn. Caleb Harlan stood in his small wooden cabin tucked deep in the Arizona cliffs, a place no soul had reason to find. 10 years he'd spent here alone, building walls of solitude as solid as the stone around him. The world outside was a distant memory, one he'd buried alongside his past. He moved through his morning routine with the precision of habit, pouring coffee from a battered tin pot into a chipped mug. The fire in the hearth crackled its warmth, barely touching the cold that lingered in his bones. At 40, Caleb was a man carved by time and loss, his face weathered, his gray eyes sharp but haunted. His hands, calloused from years of survival, cradled the mug as he stared out the small window, watching the first light creep over the rocky peaks. Then came the sound, a faint tap against the door so soft it might have been the wind knocking a branch. Caleb froze coffee halfway to his lips. No one came here. No one knew this place existed. He'd made damn sure of that, choosing a canyon so treacherous, even the hardiest settlers steered clear. The nearest town was 3 days' ride through mountain passes that could break a man or his horse. The tap came again, weaker now, like someone barely had the strength to lift their hand. His mind raced. Bounty hunters. They'd given up chasing him years ago. Apache raiders. Possible, but they didn't knock. He set the mug down his hand, drifting to the rifle above the fireplace. His fingers brushed the worn stock steady despite the sudden pulse in his chest. 10 years of silence, and now this. He moved to the window, peering through the warped glass. A figure slumped against the door frame, dark hair, matted clothing torn. Blood stained the porch, dark and glistening in the dawn light. Whoever it was, they weren't standing much longer. Caleb's instincts screamed to wait it out, let them collapse and move on. That's what the man he'd become would do. The one who'd learned trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But the tapping came again, fainter, a plea that stirred something he'd buried deep. Against every rule he'd set for himself, Caleb unlatched the heavy wooden door. She fell forward before he could step back, collapsing into his arms. A young woman Apache by her buckskin dress, her long black hair tangled with dried blood. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow but even unconscious. Her face held a fierce beauty that hit Caleb like a punch to the chest. He should have left her outside, barred the door, and pretended this never happened. Harboring an Apache in these parts was a death sentence if the wrong people found out. But her weight in his arms, the faint flutter of her heartbeat against his chest, anchored him to the moment. He carried her inside, laying her gently on the rough woolen blankets of his bed. Her fingers clutched weakly at his shirt even in her stupor, and Caleb felt the walls of his world shift. He stepped back, staring at the blood seeping through her dress. He'd patched up wounded animals before even stitched his own flesh after a bad scrape. But this was different. This was a woman Apache, and everything he'd heard about her people flooded back. Stories of warriors who could track a man across a desert of women just as deadly. Every rational thought told him to drag her back outside and let the canyon take her. But as he watched her chest rise and fall, labored and uneven, those stories felt like lies from another life. This wasn't a warrior. This was someone's daughter bleeding out in his cabin. Caleb forced himself to move. He stoked the fire, set a pot of water to boil, and gathered what passed for medical supplies, a bottle of whiskey, strips of cloth torn from old shirts, and a needle he'd used to mend his boots. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind churned. Who was she? Why was she here? And why did her presence make his carefully ordered world feel like it was cracking apart? As he returned with the hot water, her eyes fluttered open, dark brown, almost black, locking onto him with startling intensity. Most would have shown fear waking wounded in a stranger's cabin, but her gaze held something else, strength, intelligence, and a fire that hadn't been extinguished by pain. Easy. Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. You're hurt bad. Lie still. Her eyes narrowed, studying him like she could see through his skin. You are not what I expected, she said, her English clear but laced with the musical cadence of her native tongue. Caleb felt the words hit harder than they should. What had she expected? A crazed hermit, a killer who'd shoot first. He realized he'd never seen himself through another's eyes, not in 10 years. Neither are you, he said, then cursed himself for speaking. A faint smile flickered across her lips, gone as pain twisted her face. I am Tala, she said, daughter of Chief Neol, and you. You are the ghost man the elders speak of, the one who vanished into the mountains. Caleb's blood ran cold. If the Apache knew of him, his sanctuary was no sanctuary at all. 10 years of hiding useless. How do you know that, he asked, his voice low. Tala's eyes held his unflinching despite her pain. They say you lost someone. That grief made you a shadow. Her voice carried no judgment, only understanding, and it cracked something inside him he'd thought long broken. I know that pain. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but her words cut too close. 10 years he'd convinced himself isolation was strength, that needing no one made him untouchable. But this wounded stranger saw through him like his defenses were glass. He reached for her torn dress to check her wounds, but her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch sent a jolt through him, a reminder he was still alive beneath the layers of exile. Before you help me, she said, her voice fading, you should know helping me will bring them here. They won't ask questions first. Caleb's jaw tightened. Who's them white men, Tala said. They attacked our camp at dawn, killed the children first. Her voice was steady, but a tremor betrayed the weight of the words. I was by the river gathering herbs. I heard the screams, tried to fight, but there were too many. Caleb carefully lifted the fabric of her dress, revealing a deep gash along her ribs. The wound was serious, but not fatal if he acted fast. Her words hung heavy, though. These men, he said, cleaning the wound with whiskey-soaked cloth, they're hunting you specifically. Tala's laugh was bitter, barely a breath. My father was Neol. The soldiers want his family to break him. They couldn't find our main camp, so they butchered the smaller ones. Made examples. The name hit Caleb like a bullet. Neol, the Apache war chief, a man whose name carried weight in every saloon and army outpost. Helping his daughter wasn't just dangerous, it was a declaration of war against the territorial government. Jesus, he muttered, then regretted it when he saw her flinch. You fear them? Tala said, watching his face. That's why you hide here, like a wounded wolf. The accusation stung because it was true. Caleb had been running from his demons so long that courage felt like a stranger, but something in her tone, sad rather than mocking, made him want to prove her wrong. I fear what I become when I stop running, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Tala's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise. For a moment, something passed between them, an understanding of shared scars, of losses too deep for words. But before they could dwell on it, the distant thud of hooves echoed off the canyon walls. Tala's hand gripped his arm, her strength fading but desperate. They found my trail. Caleb moved to the window, pressing himself against the wall. 3 riders picked their way along the narrow path, their eyes scanning the rocks like predators. Even from a distance, their military posture was clear, but the way they moved suggested mercenaries, not soldiers. Bounty hunters. Tala whispered, struggling to sit up. They get paid extra for Apache alive. Caleb's mind raced. The smart play was to hand her over, claim he found her unconscious, maybe collect a reward. 10 years of survival demanded it. But as he looked at Tala, her dark eyes fierce despite her pain, he knew that wasn't an option. "There's a root cellar behind the fireplace," he said quietly. "Hidden panel. You can fit if you stay quiet." Tala's expression shifted from resignation to surprise. "You would risk your life for a stranger? Can you stay silent?" he asked, ignoring her question. "Even if they search for hours, I've hidden from worse," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. Her gratitude was clear, though she didn't say it. Caleb helped her to her feet, supporting her as they moved to the fireplace. He opened the concealed panel, revealing a cramped space barely big enough for one person. As Tala eased inside, their faces came close, and Caleb found himself studying her. Pain and fear hadn't dimmed the fire in her eyes, a beauty born of strength rather than softness. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" "Maybe I'm tired of running." He said the truth, spilling out before he could stop it. Before she could respond, boots thudded on the porch. Caleb sealed the panel and turned to face the door, his mind scrambling for a story. But then he saw it, the bloody bandages on the table, the water bowl stained red, and worst of all, a trail of blood drops leading from the door to the fireplace. A tracker would follow it straight to her. The pounding on the door grew louder. "Open up, territorial business," a voice barked. Caleb's hand froze on the latch. He'd made a mistake, and now both their lives hung on the story he could spin in the next 30 seconds. He yanked the door open with a scowl, feigning irritation. 3 men stood on his porch, hands on gun belts. The leader, lean with cruel eyes, wore a badge that looked more bought than earned. "Morning," Caleb said, blocking the doorway. "You boys lost Deputy Marshal Ezra Kane." The leader said no move to show papers. "We're tracking a dangerous Apache woman. Blood trail leads right to your door." Caleb followed their gaze to the crimson drops on the porch. His mind worked fast. "Dangerous, you say? All I found was a half-dead deer with an arrow in its side. Been butchering it all morning. Meat's in the smokehouse if you want proof." It was a gamble, but he'd killed a deer 2 days ago, the timing close enough to sell the lie. The second man, broader and meaner looking, stepped closer. "That's a mighty convenient story." "Check for yourself," Caleb said, gesturing toward a pile of bloody rags by the chopping block. Ezra's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look inside, just to be thorough?" Every instinct screamed to refuse, but that would only confirm their suspicions. Caleb stepped aside grudgingly. "Make it quick. I've got work to do." The 3 men entered, their eyes sweeping the cabin. Caleb's heart pounded as Ezra approached the table where the bloody bandages sat in plain view. This was it, the moment his lie would hold or break. "Messy business butchering," Ezra said, picking up a cloth strip. "Deer kicked while I was dressing it," Caleb said. "Caught me with a hoof. Tore my shirt up pretty good." He rolled up his sleeve, showing an old scar that could pass for fresh from a distance. "Had to patch myself up before I bled all over the meat." The third man, silent until now, knelt by the fireplace, running a finger along the hearth. He stood, his finger red with blood. Caleb's stomach dropped. "Interesting," the man said. "This blood pattern suggests something was dragged, something heavy." Ezra moved closer, hand on his pistol. "You know, friend, I've been tracking wounded animals for 20 years. This doesn't look like deer blood to me." The cabin fell silent, save for the fire's crackle. Caleb could almost feel Tala behind the wall holding her breath. One wrong word, and they were both dead. Funny thing about Apache blood, Ezra said, his voice conversational but cold. It's worth $50 if it's still warm. Caleb felt his world closing in. 10 years of isolation about to end in blood. But something had changed since Tala fell through his door. The man who'd run from confrontation was gone. $50, he said slowly. That's what a human life's worth to you. Ezra's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Apache ain't human. They're animals that need putting down. He gestured to his men. Search every inch of this place. She's here. The broad man moved toward the fireplace while the third started overturning furniture. Caleb watched them tear apart his sanctuary men who hid behind badges but acted like wolves. His hand inched toward the rifle above the mantel, but Ezra caught it. I wouldn't, he warned, his pistol half drawn. 3 against 1 ain't sporting odds. Depends on the 3. Caleb said, his voice low, steady. Something in his tone made the men pause. A stillness settled over him, a calm that spoke of violence held in check. The man by the fireplace straightened, suddenly aware this hermit might be more than he seemed. You know what I think, Ezra said, trying to regain control. I think you've got a soft spot for sob stories. Some Apache princess shows up and you forget what side you're on. What side is that? Caleb asked. The side that murders children at dawn. Ezra's face darkened. Those savages had it coming. Raiding settlements, killing good folk. We're bringing civilization to this territory by any means necessary. He drew his pistol fully now, and by eliminating anyone fool enough to harbor fugitives. The standoff stretched tight. The broad man by the fireplace was probing the stones, his fingers close to the hidden panel. Then, from behind the wall, a faint sound, a soft intake of breath, as Tala fought her pain. It was barely audible, but in the silence, it was a scream. The man froze, head tilted like a hound. There, he whispered, behind this wall. Something's breathing. Ezra's smile returned cruel and triumphant. Well, well. Looks like our hermit's got secrets. He kept his gun on Caleb, nodding to his men. Open it up. Caleb's mind raced. 3 to 1 meant someone would get to Tala even if he fought. Bargaining was useless. Men like these didn't honor deals. As the man at the fireplace found the latch, Caleb made his choice. He'd spent 10 years running from what he was capable of. No more. You want to know what's behind that wall, he said, his voice carrying a new edge. You're about to find out why I came to these mountains. The change in Caleb was instant, terrifying. The quiet hermit was gone, replaced by something lethal. His eyes went cold as stone. You boys made one mistake, he said, stepping away from the wall. You assumed I was hiding because I was afraid of fighting. Ezra's gun hand shook, but he held his ground. What's that supposed to mean? It means I came here to get away from what I become when people push me too far. Caleb said, his voice calm, almost conversational. 10 years ago, I was a cavalry officer. Captain Caleb Harlan, 5th Cavalry. Lost my unit to men like you, badge-wearing thieves who sold army positions and got good soldiers killed for profit. The man at the fireplace paused, glancing at Caleb. The third man, still holding a chair, whispered, Jesus Christ, you're the ghost captain. They said you were dead. Dead would have been easier, Caleb said. Rage kept me alive. Took me 2 years to track down every man responsible. Some died quick. Others had time to regret. I came here to bury that man. Problem is, you just dug him up. Ezra's confidence wavered, but his greed held. You're outnumbered. Whatever you were, you're just a hermit now. Am I? Caleb's smile was chilling. Tell you what. Walk away now, forget you found this place. Keep pushing and you'll learn why they called me the ghost captain. The man at the fireplace triggered the latch. The panels swung open, revealing Tala blood staining her dress, her eyes wide with pain and defiance. There she is. Ezra breathed, his greed overriding his fear. $50 of Apache princess. But as he stepped toward the compartment, Caleb moved. What happened next was a blur of violence honed in a dozen frontier battles and perfected in 2 years of vengeance. His hand flashed to the knife on his belt, closing the distance to Ezra in 2 strides. Ezra tried to aim, but Caleb was inside his guard, the blade finding its mark. Ezra collapsed, eyes wide with shock. The broad man fumbled for his gun, but Caleb was already on him, a single blow to the throat, dropping him gasping. The third man cleared leather, his pistol rising, but Caleb spun away, closing the distance before another shot could fire. In 30 seconds, it was over. 3 men lay dead on the cabin floor, their blood mixing with Tala's. Silence fell, broken only by Caleb's steady breathing and the fire's crackle. Tala emerged from the compartment, moving carefully, her eyes taking in the carnage without flinching. "So the stories were true," she said softly. "The ghost captain who vanished into legend." Caleb stood amid the bodies, blood on his hands, looking more like the hermit he'd been than the killer he'd become. "I tried to bury that man," he said. "Thought if I stayed away from people I could forget what I was capable of." "You cannot run from who you are," Tala said, stepping closer, favoring her injured side. "Just as I cannot run from being my father's daughter." They stood together, 2 outcasts who'd found something unexpected in each other's presence. The violence had been necessary, but it had shattered Caleb's walls. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't alone with his demons. "They'll send more," Tala said. "When these 3 don't return, others will come." Caleb nodded, already planning. "Then we can't stay here. I know places deeper in the mountains, caves the Apache used for generations. We can disappear." Tala repeated the word, heavy with possibility. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting his own loneliness. "Unless you'd rather take me back to my people." Caleb hesitated, then spoke. "My father's war won't end soon," he said, echoing her earlier words. "And after today, they'll hunt you harder. But you've already given up your sanctuary for me. Why would you do more?" "Because for the first time since I came to these mountains, I don't feel like a ghost," Caleb said. Something passed between them, an understanding beyond words. They were both survivors, wounded by a world that had taken everything. Together, they might find something worth protecting. They gathered supplies, quickly moving through the cabin with purpose. Tala touched his arm as they packed, her voice soft. "The elders say sometimes we must lose everything to find what we truly need." Caleb looked around his cabin one last time, then at Tala. Maybe they're right. They rode out as the sun dipped below the peaks, 2 figures on horseback vanishing into the wilderness. The canyon stretched silent behind them, holding only empty spaces and the promise that some bonds forged in blood and courage could never be broken. Caleb Harlan, the ghost captain, had found his redemption. Tala had found someone to share her exile. Together they would carve a new legend in the unforgiving heart of the American West.